Welcome back, everyone. In this lesson, we will implement the keylogger code. On the screen here is the package I ended up choosing for that capability. This is a very popular package, PyInput. It does a lot with the keyboard. You can also control the keyboard. But what we're interested in is monitoring the keyboard. And you notice there's some functions they define here for a key press. They call it onPress. And for the release of the key, onRelease. So we can borrow from this code that they have in their example here. But we have flexibility to do it how we choose to do it. But what's important is down here, right here is where they instantiate the listener object. We can name this variable whatever we like. That is a good name. So they're tapping into the keyboard module and the listener class. Usually in Python, a class will start with a capital letter. Modules normally start with lowercase. They're following the standard. But this class has two keyword arguments here. One of the keyword arguments is on_press, and the other one is on_release. So these keyword arguments you have to set to a function. You don't call the function. Notice we don't have an open and a closed paren, but you set it to the function name. So whenever a key is pressed, it's going to call this function. This function will be called that name. Then to start up the listener, the developers of this class, they have a start method. That allows us to start it up. And we're going to start it up in non-blocking fashion. That just means we're not going to wait around. We're going to just go ahead and start it. It's going to be asynchronous versus synchronous, like they're doing up above. This will be better for our code. So that's pretty much it. So we'll just go back to PyCharm and get this implemented, and I'll show you how it works better with our code. So I want to copy the code in, first of all. Right down here below what we've already done. Copy all that in there. I know I have a lot of code here commented out. I'm going to explain that in just a minute. And the yellow line means PEP8 warning. The style says 2 blank lines before a function. Instead of 1, you have to have 2. So as you see, I have a doc string in the function. This function records keys being pressed. It's called by the start method of the PyInput.keyboards listener. To define a function, you always start it out with the def keyword. So def, then on_press is our function name. We're expecting one argument. We're calling that argument key_press. Then down in the function, I have some code in a try except block. This is for capturing errors or exceptions. They're called in Python, not PyCharm. Exception handling. So if something would go wrong here and there's an error, it's going to call this code. But we're just accepting for the OS error exception class. Things like file permission violations and any kind of error that could happen in the OS. We will capture right here with this code. So what am I starting out with here? I have the with context manager. That's a best practice in Python for opening up files. Then I have the open function. This is how you open a file in Python. You call the open function. But we have it behind this with context manager. That way we don't have to worry about closing the file and tracking the file, how many files are open, that sort of thing. I mean, honestly, it wouldn't be hard to do here with a file closed, but this is a best practice, so I always use it regardless when I open a file. Then I'm using an F string. An F string will allow you to put variables inside your string literal here. So inside the string, we can put variables, and they will be evaluated, and the real content of this variable will be part of the string. As long as you put the variable inside curly braces, like I'm doing here. So this string won't include curly brace data store. It's actually going to include whatever is in data store's variable. And since I use the F string out in front of our string, I can't use the raw like we did up above, the little R. You can't use both. It can't be an F string and raw, otherwise the curly braces would be raw, treated as part of the string. So I can't use the R, so I have to do the double backslashes to get the 1. I have to escape the escape character in this case, like I showed you before. And this is the file name that we're going to write out the keylogs to. All the keystrokes will be appended. Notice the second argument in this open function. First argument is the file. Second argument is the method for opening the file. The little a stands for append, which means, you just keep tacking onto the file. You don't overwrite the file. Then we close this function. Then we use the as keyword. And it's going to set this file open to a file handle. And I'm just calling our file handle FH. That will be our file handle. That's like a pointer to the file. Then the next line of code, notice it's indented. It's indented under the with context manager. We use the write method. So this is how you write out the file. You just tap into the write method off of your file handle. And we have to convert the key press that comes into this function. We have to cast that. This is known as casting, because the key press is not already a string. If it was already of the string data type, we wouldn't have to do this. But it's some other object from that class that the author wrote. So it's not a string, so we have to cast it to a string before we can write it. We do that here. Key press is the argument to the string function. Then once it's turned into a string, all of that is the argument to the write function, or the write method, I should say, coming off the file handle. Okay, but what if we do have an exception? Like if this code fails because of some OS error, it's going to come down and run this code. And in this code, I'm just having our if statement. I say if in our hands. So in Python, this is like a shortcut. Really, I'm saying if in our hands equals true. If it equals true, then I'm going to go ahead and just print the key press out to the screen. Why would I do that? Well, it's because if in our hands is true, that means we're running the program ourselves, and we're going to view the output. It's not running in the background silently. So if there's a failure writing our keystrokes to this file, we're at least going to get them on the screen here. So we can at least see what's happening, what the user is typing in. Otherwise, if there's no failure, we're not going to see it on the screen because we don't really want to see it on the screen. It's going to be a lot of data. That means it's working, and we'll have it in this file here. So that's why I do this in the exception handling if there's an OS error. So down here is where we start up our listener, listener.start, and we're instantiating the class right here, the listener class, and we're passing in our function name onPress to the onPress keyword. We're not using onRelease at all. We don't care about the release of the key. All we care about is logging that press. Now notice it's red. Now before I had you hover over it and import this name. We can't do that this time because this is not a built-in. Python doesn't come installed with PyInput. So you have to come over to the packages over here, this little stack of books. Click that. Type in PyInput, like so. Just click install. Latest version's always good. And it's going to install here. I'll go ahead and minimize it. Then, once that's installed, and I think it is, now we can hover over listener and say import this name. Now, it's not from multiprocessing. It's from the pyinput.keyboard.listener. Right there is the one we want. There's a lot of them in here. You have to know what to choose, what you're dealing with. So we click that. That should import it. We go up to the top. It should be here. Yep. From the PyInput module dot the keyboard submodule, import the listener class. Then down here, you can use the listener. since we've imported it. And there's one more thing I have to do here, or this code won't work. We have to put a while loop in here just to make it where that thread won't just run and be done. So we'll just put a while true in and just pass. Actually, I think I'll just put a sleep. Just sleep a couple seconds, 3 seconds, whatever. Something like that. Sleep we'll have to import. That comes out of the time module. I think we're going to use sleep later in the program anyway, so it's good to have it up here. Okay, so now we can run the program and see how it operates. This is going to keep our program running. It's not going to run and be done because it's infinite loop. While true, it's always going to be true. So it's just going to keep sleeping 3 seconds, then going through sleeping. This here produces threads. So the listener will be running for the keylogs. So let's go ahead and click play. See there? It's running. I want to pull up Notepad. Just type in capital P, password. I don't want a star, maybe a bang. That should be good. Okay, so now we'll go ahead and kill it. So now let me pull up the file. There it is, because remember, I didn't supply a command line argument, so it by default went out to ctemp. Right here's our keylogger file. There it is. Pretty ugly, right? It did capture what I typed in, PASS, but notice the little single quotes separating each character. Then key shift R. That's when I held the shift key down. I held the right shift key down when I typed the P, because it's a capital P. And I must have held it too long. 1, 2, 3, 4 shifts. Then I backspace to remember to delete the asterisks. And I put this bang symbol. Let's see here, key.backspace, key.shift. So all of these things that the keylogger prints in here makes it kind of difficult to read. So what I chose to do is to filter some of these out. So let me go show you that in the code. Let's go back into PyCharm. Back up here, or down here, I should say. So I'm going to get rid of that. In PyCharm, if you highlight an entire block of code like that, do Control ? It'll uncomment it all at once. Or comment it. Control ? It goes either way. So what in the world is going on here? Well, this is a replace string method. Since we converted the key press to a string, we can tap into that string and run this replace function. So this replace method takes data, or text, I should say, not data, text that you want to replace with, and the second argument is what you want to replace it with. Now what you're seeing here, this underbar old, underbar new, that's not part of my code, that's from PyCharm. There's a configuration setting where you can turn on inlay hints. The hints are just supposed to help you understand these methods and functions. So it's letting us know this is the old data, this will be the new data. Old data, new data. Or I keep saying data. Old text, new text. So I'm replacing the key.enter with an actual new line. So it'll actually drop down in our file just like it really would in a real file. I'm replacing the single quote with nothing. I'm just going to get rid of those. I'm replacing key.space with an actual space. So on and so on. The double quotes together, I'm making them a single quote. I can't remember why I did that, but there's a reason. Then the key shifts, I'm getting rid of those. So this is all good and it'll read much better, but there is a risk that I need to point out to you. If a user would type in a password that actually had a single quote, you're not going to see that in your keylog file because I'm getting rid of it. So you may not choose to do this, but to me, it was worth it just so that file would read a little better. And most of the passwords I find usually don't have the single quote in them. But, you know, you can always go back to the normal way, or you can set this up however you like. But this is how I set it up. So let's go ahead and run the code. And we pull. This time I'm going to hit enter to start. I'm just going to repeat what I did last time. Okay. Kill the package. Now it's going to append. We forgot to delete the file, or I forgot to delete the file. So it still has the old stuff up there. But notice this time it didn't put it on this line. It converted that enter key to a new line. So it did drop down. So if I would have deleted the file, it would be like this. Right there. There would be a blank line up here. Isn't this much cleaner to look at? I kept the backspace in, just so I wouldn't think. If I got rid of the backspace, it would be like that. And that would get confusing. So it's good to know when a backspace happens. But I really don't need to know when a shift happens. I mean, I can tell that they did a shift to get the capital. So to me, it reads much better this way. All right, let's go back into the code. I know this video is getting long. Minimize this. One more thing I want to show you is this OS exception. So what would happen if our keys.log, we couldn't write to it? So let's go ahead and do a properties. Go into security, advanced. I'm going to disable inheritance on this file. Remove all inherited permissions. Apply. Yes. Okay. Okay. So now I won't be able to write to this thing unless I have administrative rights. So now let's go ahead and run our code. But it's not going to do anything if we're running in the background. So if I run in the background, code's running. Just type some stuff. Okay. Kill the code. I can't even open the file right now. I'm going to have to turn. It didn't write to it, trust me. What it did do is hit this exception line. But since in our hands was false, the exception didn't do anything. But at least the code's still running on the victim's target's computer. So that's the cool thing. It didn't throw up an error message on the user's computer and get us caught. It's still running, but this time let's put in a command line argument and run it. Go ahead and do an edit. ctemp will be our command line argument. I'm going to say OK. Now let's run it. See what's printing on the screen down here? Everything's going, whoa, I held the control key down. It's still running. I was trying to zoom that in for you, or zoom it up for you. There you go. But now see how it prints the control. So it's printing all the key strokes to the screen when the exception happens, when you can't write to the file, which is exactly what I wanted to do. So this is pretty cool, that code there. Let's go ahead and kill this. I think we are done with this lesson. So next lesson, I'm going to get into the clipboard or the screenshot. One of them two, I can't remember which one. So I will see you in the next video.